Test 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3.
I am doing well. I've heard so many great things, and with Texas Tracy back and forth, and yeah, it's really right. One of my favorite topics. And great. What's I guess, the tone and direction?
Testing 1 2 3. 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 Testing 1 2 3.
Okay, this is what I understand. And again, my point of reference. Okay. So we're running for 2 weeks. Yeah. Well, each time we fill in, I have a route for them. Hey, everyone, but thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, perfect.
particular. They don't think about issues, but certainly they do exist, whether it's remediation of gas stations, turning those into residents. Um, Thankfully, we are blessed that we don't have to worry about hurricanes and floods, but we do have issues that need to be addressed. And so when we think about downstate, uh, Hurricane Sandy, when we think about upstate, and all that needs to be done in order to protect our environment from our clean water and air. I have my brother standing sitting next to me, representing the Adirondack Park. We understand how important this is to our livelihood here in New York. So we want to thank you for joining. We want to thank everyone for their advocacy, and we want to thank you for your partnership, because we're all going to need to work together to ensure that this bill and these dollars are properly invested in the neighborhoods that have been impacted impacted. We will be joined shortly by my colleague in the Senate, Senator Kevin Parker will join us, and we will also hear from our commissioner of DEC. He was unable to be here today, but we will hear a message for him. And so before we get started, just a little bit about our run-of show. I will complete the introductions, and then we'll hopefully hear from Senator Parker. If not, we'll go right to Commissioner Sagos, and then Mr. Parker, and we'll start the panel discussion at that particular point. We are going to leave room for Q&A because we want to hear from our audience members and get your questions answered, because that's what the purpose of this is. We pass thousands of bills each and every year, and unfortunately, most people don't know that some bills have been passed, and they certainly could not articulate to you how it's going to impact their lives. So we wanted to get a jump on this particular bill because it is so important, and there's such opportunity here for our state that we wanted to make sure that people understood. So we're going to unpack that with all of our great friends on the panel today. So, about the Environmental Bond Act, for those of you who may not know, we're calling it the Environmental Bond Act, but it is the 2022 Clean Water, Clean Air, Green Jobs Bond Act. And this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the state to invest in the Adirondack water, wildlife, and wildlands, and create quality jobs that will support local communities and protect public health. This Bond Act is a way to help pay for many environmental programs that will benefit both our natural and human communities in the Adirondack Park and around the state. Of course, this was passed on November 8th, 2022. So what is the Bond Act? It is a mechanism by which the state can borrow money to immediately fund projects. Once a Bond Act is approved by the voters, the state issues bonds which are purchased by investors. These bonds are essentially loans that the state will repay to bondholders over a period of time. The bonds will be repaid within at least 30 years. And Bond Act money may only be used for capital projects. Remember, those are brick and mortar projects, not programs. Furthermore, only projects that fall under the descriptions outlined in the Bond Act legislation can be paid for with those funds. So it has been over 20 years since the last Environmental Bond Act was implemented in New York State. Can't imagine I was an adult during that time, but I was. The Adirondack Park faces pressing challenges, from climate change to overuse of popular wilderness trails, aging clean water infrastructure, increasingly severe and frequent storms and events, and insufficient recreational infrastructure to protect Adirondack wilderness areas are all important issues that the Bond Act will help address. Investment in important issues that the Bond Act will help address Investment in this bond act will help spur our economy, put people to work in the Adirondacks when our economy is struggling post-pandemic. So how are we spending this $4.2 billion with a B? We will be spending $1.5 billion on climate change mitigation, and we'll talk about that more in depthly as we go further in today's community forum. We'll be spending $1.1 billion on restoration and flood risk reduction, $650 million on water quality improvement and resilient infrastructure, and $650 million on open space land conservation and recreation. So we know why we are here. Let us meet our special guests. We have some replacements, so I am not going to bore you all by reading their bios. I'm going to let them introduce them. I would like this to be a conversation where we are all talking about beyond our excitement for what is to come, but really how this is going to impact New York State and your particular role in it. But we will start out with introductions. If you would give your name, your organization, and your role in ensuring that the EBA became law.
Yes, my name is Aaron Mayer, and I am the Forever Adirondacks Wilderness Campaign Director for the Adirondack Council. I am a pioneer from the EJ movement, 1987, when the toxic waste and race study was done. The solid waste incinerator analysis in Albany, New York, was one of those dots or data points for it. It was the historic analysis that was done to show that when polluting facilities or negative environmental impacts or environmental degradation happen, 9 times out of 10, it happens to people of color and intentionally targets people of color. That was a significant finding. So it was the issue. A lot of folks, said, well, it might be a coincidence, but the pioneering study done by the United Church of Christ, the toxic waste and race, led by Dr. Ben Chavis. 2 of the very principal researchers were Vernice Miller Travis of Harlem and Dr. Charles Lee of Harlem. And a very, very seminal watershed study, and we're proud to be, and I was proud to be part of that under the microscope, as we would say. But the critical outcome is the wholesale shift in analysis and focusing on frontline communities as we are now today, almost 30 years post that study and analysis. And this Bond Act and the one prior, a lot of EJ communities in the state of New York had a lot of impact on it, but this one's probably the most significant. The last one, a lot of investment went into green infrastructure that still hit and benefited suburban white communities throughout the state of New York and suburban white zip codes. It did a lot of great work in New York City too, because the first one also we still had actually schools that had coal plants in them that were actually eradicated under the first Bond Act. So for a city with high asthma concentration, it was very critical. And I was involved in that under George Pataki in getting that one passed. And it's been an honor to be a part of this one. And my role in this one in advocating for the Adirondacks, because a lot of people don't know that the science that did the PM 2.5 analysis and studies behind asthma and asthma tracking state, the data collection from that, believe it or not, comes from the Adirondacks. So a lot of the core public health science is there, as well as it is the headwaters and source waters for a lot of Hudson River Valley communities. The Hudson River begins at Lake Chiricahua in the Adirondacks and south. So being a part of that, and then also the Adirondacks is our nation's largest wilderness carbon sink, which basically is what, we talk about manufactured solutions of carbon capture storage, but there's the organic solution of wilderness and wilderness forest that takes out tons of carbon out of our atmosphere. So being part of this, arguing from a number of levels, but from a number of benefits, not only to humanity and the environment, but also to underserved frontline communities as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see everybody, and it's an honor to in particular be with Mr. Mayer, who is a a hero of mine in the environmental justice movement. I am Jean Bergman. I'm the Senior Advisor for Energy Policy for Sane Energy Project, which is a very small but feisty organization that is committed to stopping fossil fuel infrastructure in New York State and in the states that are fracking and sending the gas to us. And to be honest, we did not have a significant role in shaping or passing this bill, although a lot of us were working to elect different folks in the November election and urging people to turn their ballot over and vote for this bond act. And I like to think that we had some effect on that. But we also work on a lot of legislation and policy that intersects directly with the issues that are raised here in the bond act, and that to the extent that we are successful, will result in enhancing the impact of the funding that the Bond Act provides. So we're incredibly excited about the act. One of the things that's so exciting about it for us is that 59% of New Yorkers voted for this, far more than for any candidate or any other kind of position. It is rare to see that sort of enthusiasm for something in New York, and that it included environmental justice and equity issues as well as green spaces and clean water was literally breathtaking. So it's a terrific step forward for our state. Thank you.
Thank you. First, thank you, Assemblywoman Zennerman, for hosting and convening such an important discussion on the Bond Act and what that means for communities, particularly environmental justice communities. My name is Eunice Coe. I'm with the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. We're a citywide network organization that links member organizations from the most environmentally burdened communities in New York City. We really focus on city, state, federal, and regional level advocacy. We integrate both policy, research, analysis, organizing, and advocacy to influence legislation and the passing of legislation such as the Bond Act that was recently passed in November, which is why we're all here today. We recognize as an organization that climate change, environmental burdens disproportionately affect communities of color and low-income communities who often have to bear the brunt of air quality issues, water pollution, incinerators being cited, et cetera, increased waste truck traffic in these communities, which means only with the changing climate that those risks and the disproportionate burdens are really only going to increase. So we hope with funding like the Bond Act, part of it is earmarked, 35% of it is supposed to go to environmental justice communities, which follows a similar provision to the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which was also passed a few years ago. This is the type of funding and action we really need to see to realize our really ambitious state and city climate goals. We're really putting the environmental justice communities who've, again, borne the brunt of climate change and environmental burdens and pollution, and really centering their needs and ensuring that we all have a livable future where we all can thrive.
Thank you.
Hello and good evening. My name is Patrick Foster. I am here from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So the state agency that is the environmental protection and the natural resource management agency for the entire state of New York, not just the city of New York. I always have to make that clear when I'm speaking here in New York because of the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, but that is a very different agency from us. So thank you, Assemblyman Member Zinnerman, for the invitation. We are so excited at DEC that the act was passed. We were similarly educating folks to flip their ballot. We couldn't weigh in on the merits, of course, as a state agency, but super, super happy that people did flip the ballot and vote for the Bond Act and voted to put us to work, really. And we are ready to do that. So we are the prime agency in the act to administer the programs that will be funded through the sale of the bonds. But we're also working with our agency partners throughout the state, NYSERDA, New York State Parks, all sorts of different agencies. And we have started that process. There is an interagency working group that has been formed by the governor And so we already have sort of boots on the ground working to put all the logistics together for making this happen, this once in a generation chance to really direct a lot of funds towards the communities that need them. So thanks again for the opportunity to be here and for organizing this panel and helping to get the word out about the Bond Act.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Assemblymember Zimmerman and Senator Parker, for the invitation to be a part of this amazing meeting tonight. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. We've got excellent representation from Patrick Foster, our regional director, and Adriana Espinosa is also Deputy Commissioner for Equity and Justice. She's also aboard this really important call virtually today. This is about the Environmental Bond Act, and listen, thank you for all that you did to pass this extraordinary measure, $4.2 billion. Which went to the voters. Voters said yes on November 8th and delivered really historic opportunity for New York State, with really 70% of New Yorkers saying yes. It's not often that we get legislation that passes where voters get to weigh in. To have 70% of New Yorkers say this is a big deal, this is worth the state's investment, is really noteworthy. It's really encouraging from my perspective about the state's commitment to the environment. So more about the Bond Act. Listen, this is going to be a game changer for New York. It's going to give us resources that we haven't had, frankly, ever, to reduce some of the burdens on our environment and on communities, and especially communities of color. I want to thank you for bringing together climate justice advocates, environmental advocates today, to talk about how this Bond Act can help to reduce some of the burdens in communities all across the state, and very specifically in Brooklyn. This is a chance for us to truly reduce those burdens by eliminating pollution, creating more access to green space, and giving us a chance to reduce the harms of the last many decades, particularly in communities of color. This is really exciting for us. We aim to hold ourselves to account in implementing this at the state. We know that 35% of the proceeds of this Bond Act, at least 35%, we go 40%, will go into these so-called disadvantaged communities. And that's really important as we aim to reverse the harms of the past. I look forward to working with the both of you and all of the advocates around the state, particularly around the justice communities, disadvantaged communities, as we begin to craft the approach forward, identifying projects and making this a real winner for all New York. So again, thank you. I'm sorry for not being there with you in person today, but so excited to be working with you over the coming years to make this a reality. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. So I want to start with, I want to kind of take this in big chunks. This is a huge bill. It's a huge bill. There's a lot to do. And so I'm going to just ask for you all to kind of weigh in where your expertise lies. And so we'll start again with climate change mitigation. So when we think about our structures, so we just had a conversation about the beauty of this particular building. But, you know, part of this is to ensure that our buildings are green infrastructures, whether they are those that have to be adapted or those that we are now building. So if we could just, I see a lot of shaking hands. And so whoever wants to jump in first on just the retrofitting that needs to happen, or just the standards that we've set and what we want to see and what people will notice. I mean, this really is for the audience to understand how this is going to impact them where they are.
Well, if Aaron Mayor, Adirondack Council, whether it is a structure like this in Brooklyn or Binghamton, Syracuse, Buffalo, many of these frontline communities, you know, they are now many cases working class, the tax base is not there, and given the things that local municipal governments would have to bond for and finance, whether it is lead pipes, aging water sewer infrastructure, or retrofitting structures such as this, right now we would have to say, if we are going to finance this, what can we not do? Mm-hmm. And so often cases, it's almost like a person on a fixed income deciding whether or not they're going to have enough food to eat or go to the doctor or pay the rent and pay the bills. A lot of communities in the state of New York are in that condition. And so they have to check what they can at the municipal or county level afford and how they can spread that burden around. All things being said, we know that local politics plays a significant role. In most cases, frontline communities, while they may be large in numbers, have the least amount of power. So having this as a asset that can be used, and having the priority set aside for, low-income communities, you can ensure projects, clean energy projects, clean water projects, clean infrastructure projects, that there will be revenues there to support them. As I mentioned earlier, the first Bond Act, it was basically retrofitting schools and school power plants. We now must do that again because, as you know, we have a lot of power plants are depending upon frack gas, and frack gas comes with a number of risks aside from the, the greenhouse gases. But in some cases, because it's coming out, it may have low-level radiation. The radon, this is also a part that's flowing through the pipes as well. So if we are pushing for clean energy sources and switching over, then this is a very powerful asset that we can have as a frontline go-to. It's not enough, $4.1 billion for the state of New York. It is not enough, let's be clear. But it is a help nonetheless.
I think for us, one of the things that is, I totally agree with everything that Aaron just said, but it's one of the things that's also so significant is that it is targeting municipal and state buildings because that is the nature of the Bond Act for those improvements. And there is a tremendous amount that can be done. It specifies using renewable energy, solar and wind on and around municipal buildings, and also heat pumps. I think one of the things that the DEC is going to need to do is to think really creatively about how they can amortize the investments in these city and state buildings so that they benefit the larger communities of color in particular around them. And one way is to use thermal energy networks. And a bill that passed at the last minute in the last session called the Utility Thermal Energy Network and Jobs Act requires all of the utilities to build between 1 and 5 pilot projects to link sort of multiple buildings and institutions and water bodies and subway stations in different communities to balance the heat and cool transfer that they produce, which means that essentially there would be hydro loops running around, and each building could link to that with heat pumps, and it would it's incredibly efficient, incredibly low cost, and very beneficial. And so you can take the investment in these buildings and share the benefits with the communities around. And I think we can do that with many of the features in this Bond Act. I think it's really important that we don't limit the benefits of the Act to just 35% to environmental justice communities. Don't think of it as a sort of a carve out, but think of it as a floor, and really make that a priority, because other communities, they can plant trees and build solar farms, but disadvantaged communities don't have that advantage. And finally, some of the things in there like urban forests, communities with trees are healthier, and they also build greater value in the community. So low-income communities will experience better health and also gradual economic development just as a result of the health and value of those trees.
Yes, thank you for raising the significance of building retrofits and as we think about climate change mitigation, but also I think the benefits that environmental justice communities in particular can experience. We talk about building retrofits, there's the clean energy getting built. Well, first let me take a step back. Buildings are the biggest polluter in New York City, more than the transportation sector. So decarbonizing our buildings is like central to meeting our city and state's carbon reduction goals. So knowing that retrofits are going to be, I think, show multiple benefits. So on the clean energy side, obviously the surplus of jobs that are being created. You mentioned heat pumps, in the installation of heat pumps, the electrification of our grid also will be key. But there's also retrofits for energy efficiency. When we think about energy efficiency, think about what our communities usually have disproportionate energy bills that they pay. Hopefully, as we continue to decarbonize and electrify our grid and move our buildings to more energy efficient buildings, those costs will go will decrease. So again, that's hopefully a benefit. We hope environmental justice communities in particular, who again face increasing costs for utilities, will be able to experience. On the job side, retrofitting buildings will create a whole host of jobs, not only just construction, but also maintenance when we're thinking about solar panels, like for example. So that's, I think, key to think about in terms of kind of the profile of jobs and kind of the workforce opportunities that I believe are available, that are, I think are still yet untapped. And the market, I believe, still has a lot of work to kind of, I think, meet the demand that will be needed to wholesale retrofit our buildings here in New York City in particular. And so, yeah, I think another benefit to mention, the health benefits that you raised, particularly indoor air quality. Gas stoves do produce, studies do show negative health outcomes. And so hopefully as we move more to like induction stoves and things like that, indoor air quality will also be improved for some of our communities who experience disproportionate health impacts from negative air quality, whether it be outside or indoors. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
So I'll just point out a couple things. There are some areas of the Bond Act where there will need to be a lot of programs that are developed because we're addressing things that maybe have not been addressed or addressed in the way that the Bond Act has framed them, particularly, let's say, in the flood risk area. But in the climate change area and what's outlined in the Bond Act, there are a lot of existing programs. So that's an exciting thing because we have an amazing agency, authority, the New York State Energy Research Development Authority, that has a lot of programs that address a lot of these climate change mitigation issues. One of them being the Clean Green Schools Initiative, which we expect to get a lot of resources and which will ultimately mean that every public school in every disadvantaged community across the state will benefit from Environmental Bond Act funding through that program. There are a host of other programs and other agencies that are going to be involved in creating the pieces of existing programs and also new programs that are going to fulfill the particular requirements of the Act and the opportunities that it presents. But I think, as other people have noted, in the Act, the language says that not less than $400 million is going to be going towards retrofit. And I think everybody understands and agrees that much, much more will be needed in order for us to really fulfill the dream of having, a clean energy economy in our construction sector. So I think that there's of course so many opportunities, and we're figuring out the nuts and bolts of how to get this money into the hands of the folks who are going to be doing these amazing projects. Mm-hmm. But at least in the climate space, there's a lot of existing programs to look at and to try and to focus on in terms of advocacy and making sure that those dollars are going into the right places geographically.
I just want to jump on that because I'm glad you mentioned the Clean Green Schools, because one of the pieces of it, since this is building a significant piece on infrastructure, is, and we talk about clean water, and most critical asset are children in schools. Mm-hmm. And right now we have, we talk about Flint, but we also have that lead line issue even right now within a number of New York schools throughout the state. And we have a significant opportunity to make a dent in that. When we talk about clean water is not only essential, but it's also essential to child development. And having now the funds to start to tackle one of the huge crises in schools, is a huge one that's then not going to, again, you now fix it so that they can start to tackle that crisis and not pull money from their school budgets. Absolutely. To fix that crisis. And it's urgent. This is when we talk about frontline. And, I would actually, if Commissioner Basil Sagos was here, I would actually rib him and say, listen, why don't you ask also, we got this $4.1 billion. You should also push for more staff for the implementation side of it. It's not enough to have this big pipe going in, but it's funneled at the point of the capacity of the agency that has to carry the water, or as they say, or deliver the goods. And, there was a governor 30 years ago that prided himself on slashing the state workforce. Well, what that meant is that you're slashing the people who have the skill, the knowledge, and the ability to protect New Yorkers. So I talk about slashing the workforce, you're slashing New Yorker protection. So now we're asking for money. It's coming at the federal level. This great bond act is here. So I would just, politely, when, Assemblywoman, when you go back, you and Senator
So he's
Parker.
ribbing both of us, Patrick. He's
So
gonna-
you and Senator Parker lean on the caucuses and say, this is great stuff. We want to definitely get some of that IRA money from the federal level because they got billions of dollars with the B for the first time.
We are definitely
With
working on
a
that.
40-by-40 mandate, meaning that 40% of that money is going to be set aside for those frontline communities. But again, it's stovepiping the states that just don't have the capacity, even if you got the money and the assets. We're the troops, as they say, to deliver. So I just hope that an extension and collateral conversation, that this is highlighting that it also looks at another need, which is the state civil service from state, county, and locals that also need to be invested in to do the implementation.
So
Absolutely.
I just have to note that I've never met Aaron before, so I did not put him up to that. But I
Right, so
wholeheartedly agree with you, and,
So we
and I
see
think
the
that that's
increased FTEs in the budget. We know where
yeah,
it
that's
came
definitely
from.
the reality here.
Full-time
In order to implement all of these programs.
Absolutely. Well, since we're talking about children, and there's 1.1 million just here in New York City, I'm very excited about the school bus emissions and moving to electric. So since Patrick, you're on the mic, if you could just talk a little bit about what that's going to look like in terms of, again, implementation, where we're getting the fleet from, when are we going to start online onboarding some of those vehicles, and how this is going to help the state where we know, especially in places like the Bronx and some parts of Brooklyn, the asthma rates of children are just through the roof.
Yeah, so a lot of my answers
Yes.
tonight will be, we're trying to,
Figure it
we're
out.
starting to figure that out.
Mhm.
But I can say that we're looking at a lot of existing programs because we're in this space where there are a lot of existing programs there. There's the EPA Clean Bus School Bus Program, for example, that already exists, and that might be a model for what we can do here. There's also New York State programs as well that we're going to be looking at. So there's a strong focus on ensuring that we do see the 35% as just a floor, and I think that these opportunities to benefit public schools are going to be a very strong way for us to meet that floor and go beyond. So we're still working out what the programs are going to look like, but we're excited too that there's specific money that's going to be going towards that.
And again, $500 million for school buses for our cities is a really big deal. So absolutely.
There's another benefit of these electric school buses, which is that school bus or any bus that has a big battery is a mobile power unit. So some of you may remember that during Hurricane Sandy, buses provided power on Staten Island, for example. People could actually use those buses both as warming stations, but also ways of getting energy into their phones and so on. So we can use those buses as part of our strategy for increasing resilience, especially in communities which have very little access to that kind of resilience. So many of the investments that will be made under the Bond Act will have multiple benefits which don't show up in the first pass, that are not the primary, but rather ancillary qualities that are going to prove to be very important as the climate crisis worsens.
Thank you. Well, let's talk a little bit about air and water, and specifically air. I'm sure you all are aware of the proposals that the mayor's office has put out, specifically here in Brooklyn. People who live in this section of Brooklyn have to deal with the BQE. And so they have a number of examples of how they could mitigate all of that pollution coming off of that highway with trucks and green spaces and all these imagined things. Is there a particular project across the state that you are championing that will show up in the EBA, and something that you yourself are really advocating for as well?
It's an excellent question, and one of the great things that we had the opportunity with the Adirondack Council was to host the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian caucus. And folks would say, well, why would you have the caucus downstate, up in the mountains, upstate? Was that a junket, an excursion? I go, no, it's where the science is. And it was our ability in getting them there for them to actually go to the Mount Marcy labs and these scale labs and these places that are actually capturing the baseline data that deal with air quality. And that we talk about the reductions in state staff and research dollars have now left these robust frontline world-class science data systems now down to a few interns, a few faculty, maybe one faculty. The labs are in that are running millions of dollars worth of equipment are in the equivalent of a trailer park double wide. And when you see that, and that this is the very data that the New York State Attorney General and the state, when it sued the Ohio River Valley coal fire plants and that dirty energy is blowing out of the Ohio River Valley, and that pristine data was collected at the Marcy Station in the various mountains and peaks up there. Because why in the mountains, you got to have the place where you can ice, as they say, as a control, a pure control. Because as they say in New York City, there are many confounding variables. And so imagine trying to sue dirty energy coal fire power plants using, as I say, the metropolitan area, because then they get to point at all these other point sources of air particulate and pollution, saying it's not us, it's all that traffic, it's all the diesel buses. But with the data centers that we have in the Adirondacks, we actually can control that because you know where the prevailing weather patterns are from, and they're capturing the data from the cloud. They got actual cloud capture systems using the high peaks. So when you see that science in real time and having our caucus leaders in your cities to actually go up and see the science, and more importantly, how that data is collected, and then how vulnerable we are right now to actually have that 40 years worth of continuous data infrastructure to collapse, because we're actually on a shoestring right now. The crisis is right now. Who would be the biggest losers if we lose that baseline data? It would be the urban areas in the state, the urban population, the youth in our state. So when we talk about liabilities and chasing the polluting sources, we would lose that capacity to fingerprint and point where things are coming from. So financing the science and data collection is going to be very critical. Some of the technology there has been around since the 70s, and as many folks know, the science and the instrumentation now is more expensive, much more sensitive, but better. And it's kind of we had a beautiful section where they had the cloud capture equipment, which has this old equipment, and then you have the FBI and all the others equipment that's there, which is all because they're well financed. State of the art, technology there next to this decrepit, scientific data is capturing air quality data for the state of New York. And we said we have to do better, given the budget of the state, given the power of the state, given the use of the data, and that it's been continuously collected. And we're now running the risk of ending up with gaps in that data. Having our legislature there to see that, hopefully, I do know that there has been a commitment to act on that. So this bond act will actually be buying and investing in equipment that, again, it's protecting its front line. It's the baseline air monitoring data that is very critical to doing particulate, but also acidification, all the other impacts when we talk about burning fossil fuels. That's where that sensitive information and platforms exist. It's in the high peaks, and they're failing. And right now we have an opportunity to actually repair, improve, and do better, and actually increase the number of scientists that would be part of the Survey Corps.
I just want to uplift the important point of the air quality monitoring, especially for communities of color who often live in areas that are cited with, expressways, highways, point sources of pollution, et cetera. and oftentimes have advocated and said their air quality issues are so terrible. But oftentimes were not believed because they did not have said evidence to show the disproportionate impacts of air quality. So I think having hyper-local air quality monitoring is extremely important because each neighborhood is exposed to different point sources of pollution, whether that be being next to the BQE, whether it be being next to a waste management facility. And so I think that becomes, again, like really important to highlight where those hyper-local impacts are, or what we call it could be hotspots. The Assemblywoman mentioned the South Bronx, as we know, called Asthma Alley. Children suffer from high rates of asthma and hospitalizations in that area. And so to be targeted in our solutions and our mitigation measures, I think is extremely important. And again, really prioritizing the communities who have experienced legacy pollution and really being able to address targeted solutions. I'm sure DC might have something to say about air quality monitoring. It's something I know that you're also studying.
Yeah, so I can't really, pick specific projects to answer your question directly, but I will say that I'm glad we're talking about monitoring, because monitoring is essential for us throughout this process in order to have the information so that we can pick the projects, right? And as Eunice alluded to, we have a large statewide community air monitoring program that is now underway under the CLCPA. And we're already
Another
getting
piece of
data back from
legislation.
that and doing lots of community engagement. So if folks are tuning in now and they want to tune in more on that program, please Google it or call my office. And we'll get you hooked up with information about that happening in New York City. So that's super important. Also, EPA has funding for community air monitoring, and hopefully New York organizations are taking advantage of that as well, because as we work through our process, we're going to be looking for that type of information when we're, evaluating projects
Okay.
in this
Well,
space.
Well, thank you. Oh, no, did you want to finish?
Yeah, I guess more broadly, outside of that, I'll just say that part of this process everywhere is going to be trying to leverage other sources of funding. And the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, on the federal level is going to provide, let's hope, if people take advantage of it, a lot of money for these types of climate-related, energy-related, and air quality-related projects.
And I also just want to circle back to the conversation about trees, because you mentioned it, and it certainly has a lot to do with how clean our air is and people's ability to breathe. But I want to make sure this time when we plant trees that we plant the right trees, because during the last Million Trees project here, a lot of trees, honey trees in particular, were planted in communities of color, and it literally raised the asthma rates and allergies for certain populations. And so we want to be very clear that, yes, we want to plant trees, we want more green communities, but we need the right trees in order to make that happen. So, yes.
This is really critical, and I think, like anything, there are oftentimes you have the investment, and there's a lot of great and excellent ideas, but putting on the scientist hat, and by the way, I'm a retired epidemiologist. You also have to look at the risk, and you have to do the test, making sure you're not causing more harm. And I think that that's critical. And one of the, of the pieces of this is also, trees and healthy soils and vegetation. This is part of the carbon sinks that we need to improve. And so not only do these trees and vegetation and healthy vegetation improve curb appeal and value of homes, go to the suburbs. I tell folks, they love the green. That is also true, in New York. I grew up, in northern Westchester, and my summers were spent in New York City. So in New York City, they had the Fresh Air Fund where kids, my cousins and some of the others would go north into Westchester. We had the Bad Air Fund where my dad, they would send us down to Harlem during the 60s. But, it's really critical having green spaces and greenscape. So when I grew up, you know, and in spending my summers in Harlem at 138th Street, Lenox, you know, we had St. Mark's Church and everything was paved. And I says, now I know why some of the best athletes are coming at the city, because they don't want to fall down and skin themselves up, whether you're playing basketball or anything that requires a grass surface. And to still have a number of parks and urban settings throughout the metro area that are still paved, the overuse of blacktop and asphalt, you're contributing to the heat island effect, which exacerbates other chronic illnesses, whether it's asthma, heat stress, etc. But it is the most unhealthy and unsafe, infrastructure on surface that any community should ever have to deal with. And the last Bond Act funded greenscapes and green spaces in suburban areas. And that one of the things that were left behind was making sure that was also extended to urban areas. And it's not just the city, but throughout the state, you will find the separate and unequal recreation infrastructure throughout major urban areas, especially areas where Black and Latino communities are, where they are still paved surfaces. So looking at the soils, greening, not only just the trees, but the vegetation for them is not only healthier, it's also safer, okay? But it also is another stitch that we need in the fight against anthropogenic climate change.
I think that is important information for people to have. As you know, our Parks Department here now has scoping sessions whenever they're going to reimagine a park. And this is the type of information that people need before they sit down. There's, great pictures of wonderful things that could happen in the park, but asking those critical questions about, will this harm? Will it reduce? My community is on a heat island. At any point in time, we're 7 degrees higher than other parts of the state. And so we want to make sure that people have that information and ask those critical questions. So let's talk about water. We've talked about air. Who wants to jump in with, I think everybody here knows why we have sustainability goals, why we have the climate change legislation, and why now the EBA. What is it that people need to know about where we are at this point in time in terms of our water infrastructure? And we talked about lead pipes. We did put money in the budget last year for lead pipe remediation. Again, thanks to the Biden administration. That hasn't rolled out yet. It did in New Jersey. We hope to follow them and their efficiency. Nobody's complaining, and all of the pipes have been replaced. So we have to deal with that. But the water around from the Adirondacks Park through the Hudson and, here in Brooklyn, our different waterways. What do we need to look forward to in this Bond Act in the next couple of years, and how we're going to ensure that our water remains safe?
Well, one of the critical issues, whether it's in the Adirondacks, whether it's in Westchester County, Mount Vernon, places like Peekskill, New Rochelle, other areas, there's still a number of homes that are on septic, and you have failing septic systems and basically, discharging and spilling, in short poo, in liquid poo into, surface areas. And so there's a serious health risk of kids or people walking through leach fields or areas where there is fecal contaminated soil because of failing septic systems. There are municipalities that are strapped, and their water treatment plants, et cetera, are also failing. There are a number throughout the Hudson River Valley of municipalities that are on combined sewer storm overflow, which are when heavy storm events like we're hitting now, as we talk about the 100-year events, the 200 and the 500 and the 7-year event, 100-year events, they're now becoming regular, almost biannual events. And with all that massive, as they say, they call it the atmospheric rivers. As they start to hit our communities, they overwhelm these folks with aging and decrepit sewer systems and CSO systems. And what happens is that when they get saturated, it mixes up with raw sewage and it dumps it right into the Hudson River. And the Hudson River, Long Island Sound, and the Mohawk River. So you have these serious issues where you have failing water sewer infrastructure that impacts clean water. And right now, this is what's probably one of the most significant investments that we can make that can absolutely help cash-strapped communities, whether it's rural or urban, benefit from, as I say, replacing our rotting infrastructure. People don't realize the city of Albany, the capital state of New York, they're still digging up areas and finding wood pipes. So you have areas of New York, and you probably might have a few down in New York City, that you'll find some of the old leaking water systems actually still has timber pipes from the 18th and 19th century still carrying water. So sometimes you can see an old area where there's water bubbling up, and it might be just very ancient, as I say, infrastructure that needs to be replaced. And so what happens is that people think that municipalities have everything on the GIS and they can find every leak. No, they do not. And so one of the things that this investment can happen is the modifying and modernizing water and sewer infrastructure that is desperately needed.
Patrick, I'll just say quickly before you go that this is another one of those things that as we look at what the transformation of Brooklyn, especially downtown Brooklyn and these very large buildings that we have, how is our city infrastructure going to, withstand, that sort of pressure? And are we ready? But that's just my plug for something I have to do later on. But Patrick, you can talk about.
I can't wait to hear more about that.
Yes.
Seriously. So the first thing to notice in the Bond Act itself and to point out is that in the climate change section itself, there is a dedication for not less than $200 million to air and water projects going to disadvantaged communities. So that's not even in the flood section or in the water quality section. It's in the climate change section. So just to point that out, that it's called out very clearly, even in that section, that these things are big priorities. That agency that I talked about earlier, the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, is key to water quality in New York City. We regulate them as a state agency, and we also work with them on many projects. Aaron's comments about old infrastructure points me to places in New York City that don't have infrastructure. So there are portions of New York City, they're not on septic. You can flush your toilet, but the storm water sewers are just not there. Large sections, heavily populated sections in disadvantaged communities, in particular in Southeast Queens. So there's a real opportunity, I would say, there to have these types of projects help these communities. And there's also, we know the need, and we know a lot of ways to fix the problem, both gray and green in terms of projects. So those are the types of projects that, again, that we're going to be looking for. I just wanted to note on trees. My office does a fair amount of granting of funds, which is my favorite part of my job. And we do street tree, granting now and again. And what's always super important for me is to understand if there's stewardship connected to those plantings. Because as you noted, just having a target of X number of trees to be planted isn't always going to get you the results that you want, especially if those trees die off. So tying that back to what we're talking about right now, I think the process is also going to be looking at partners, community stewards, and making sure that these are going to be the types of projects that are going to last.
I think, no,
Oh, yeah,
absolutely.
sorry, if I could just touch on something that Aaron brought up in terms of flooding risks and municipal stormwater systems. In addition to improving water quality, upgrading our extremely old municipal stormwater system should help, especially some areas, particularly Southeast Queens, for example. There's just significant drainage issues in some areas. So when you see rainfall, let's say even, I think it's it's like above 1.5 inches is what our system can handle in New York City. Certain areas just get flooded. And as we saw with Hurricane Ida, the most vulnerable people are impacted. So Asian American immigrants were primary victims of Hurricane Ida. And so anyway, I just wanted to make the important connection of kind of these co-benefits we can see if we make our infrastructure resilient, sustainable, and upgrade it to meet the challenge of the climate crisis we're experiencing. So just wanted to, just highlight also that importance. And in terms of co-benefits, also going back to parks and trees, would encourage communities also, if the park department is ever coming out scoping a park, like what are additional co-benefits can we ask for? What are some stormwater mitigation measures? Can we have like a drainage or retention site at this park? Can we not have impervious pavement? So exploring those different like solutions, I think is going to be really important as we continue, like as we just figure out our resiliency and climate strategy moving forward.
I just want to reinforce that. I think what you were saying earlier about paving over areas, that's one of the reasons that we have so much water flowing into storm drains that otherwise could be absorbed into healthy soils.
And again, it's going to Ida, Sandy, people died in what they call basement apartments. This is stunning. I mean, one of the things that this climate crisis has brought is that we're finding out a lot of houses and homes and residential areas and blocks are built in what used to be river and creek beds. And now they're just low-lying areas. And with everything paved over and people trying to earn an extra buck by, finishing off a basement and renting it out. And what the things that we see in the wake of this climate crisis is people dying as a result of drowning in their apartments. So I just think that, again, it just underscores the need for infrastructure improvement, but also, watershed mapping. There needs to be a much more detailed, comprehensive mapping, especially so those places and those streets and those byways that hadn't seen the 200-year or 300-year or 500-year flood, that we start to revision it so that they also we're building in the resilience of notification of communities and risk, and so that we save lives. But also on trees, one of the things that we, I would be remiss in saying is that the biggest thing that we can invest in is buying wilderness. And right now, some huge tracts in the Adirondack are coming up for sale. And one is the Whitney parcel. And the thousands of acres there could absolutely be a critical investment with regards to a wilderness carbon sink. And what's interesting about the Whitney parcel, when we talk about intersectional moments, you think about the Whitneys, the same family that gave us the cotton gin and that fueled slavery, and to have that parcel now, as I say, turned over and as an investment. And there's something called Black suffrage settlements, where you had the Black resistance movement and the right to vote in the 1830s, 1840s, to have it named in honor of those settlements. So you're not only reclaiming something, but doing restorative justice and naming that land from what used to be slave owners and slave owner, their descendants, to now putting something that also connects it back to those who also resisted that. So in buying any of these major tracts, to me, it is perhaps more important to invest in that than say, carbon capture storage solution. Because to me, carbon capture storage, so through regulation, these folks should not be getting incentives to deal with the carbon that they're creating. They should be ordered to do that. They should not get taxpayer dollars for that. But that money should actually go to real projects and real people. We don't want to have something that's designed to help the planet and help people actually now line the pockets of polluters. So I just think that, one of the things that we want to do is invest in those things that actually can be restorative, but also solutions that actually truly have an impact on climate.
All right, thank you for sharing that. And I just wanted to lift up, because we were talking about it, $250 million of voluntary buyout and restoration projects. So people who live in coastal areas who have experienced storms, there's an opportunity for them to be made whole and live somewhere else in safe places. So that's great. So now we're going to move on to my favorite topic, so that we can then open up for questions to the audience. And that is green jobs. As some of you may know, I sit as the chair on the subcommittee of emerging workforce. Green jobs is certainly top of the list of industries that we're looking at, and specifically looking for creating career pathways for young people and for returning citizens. And then, as I like to always say, I love seniors, so those looking for encore careers. I think I almost qualify for that myself now as well. So let's talk about some of the jobs that are going to become available, and what people should look out for and how they can get connected. So I'm going to start with Patrick, and we're going to come on down the line, and then I'm sure that people have questions and they can come on up to the podium and ask those questions for the panel to address.
Sure. So I can give some sort of overview information about what's in the act related to labor and labor standards. So there's an entire section, a title of the act that's dedicated to labor standards. So I think that's important for folks to understand. Our legislators made this a priority, and that title in the act subjects projects funded to the Bond Act to prevailing wage requirements. It requires apprenticeship agreements for projects receiving over $25 million. It provides for project labor agreements and labor peace agreements on certain municipal, state, and private projects. And it also includes Buy America provisions for iron and structural steel. There's also been an analysis done of the number of green jobs that will be created by the Bond Act, and I think it's around 100,000. So this is good news in many ways for environmental quality and also for our transition into a green economy that we're all are going to need to be a part of right now. The federal funding that I mentioned before is directly aimed at transitioning our economy and nationwide into a green economy, and it is a big priority of this administration on the state level to ensure that transition happens, and the Environmental Bond Act is a piece of that.
Randy, thank you.
I mean, one, I think offshore wind jobs, I believe it's like a NYSERDA solicitation. What we've seen is a lot of offshore wind company interest in New York City right now because of that. So I think that's ripe for opportunity when it comes to workforce development and building out that pipeline for offshore wind jobs. Again, as that industry kind of takes hold in New York City in particular. And just want to echo Assemblywoman's statement on, sustaining career jobs. We believe in union jobs, pre-apprenticeships, apprenticeships, all that. We really need to be thoughtful about the pipeline we're building and ensuring, again, that communities of color and low-income communities are receiving the benefits of these investments, of these job opportunities, and are not, again, forgotten in this transition. We believe in a just transition. We believe that environmental justice communities, disadvantaged communities, really should be at the forefront of benefiting from those jobs. So I think there is really a whole world with offshore wind jobs that we're going to really see blow up in New York in particular. And then we touched on this earlier in this conversation, but building retrofits, I think, will also be a really big industry here in New York City. We have Local Law 97, which mandates buildings over 25,000 square feet to decarbonize, essentially. That is huge. We're talking about a lot of buildings in New York City. So with a lot of buildings, with a lot of upgrades should come a lot of jobs. So I think that will also be another area where we can see a lot of job opportunities. And not really just thinking only like just construction. We want people also, especially our environmental justice communities, to also be not just dealing with construction and maintenance, but also having more substantive engineers, architects, etc. So I think, just those two examples, I think in terms of green jobs should be fairly big and exciting here in New York City.
Jean?
Oh, sorry.
I think we're all on the same page here. In addition to the job opportunities that this bill will provide, there's a couple of other bills that I think are going to be really important in helping to affirm this standard of the kinds of labor protections and opportunities that the bill provides. And one of those is the Build Public Renewables Act, which would allow New York Power Authority to own and build renewable energy generation. Right now, it's very limited in how much it can do. It already generates 25% of our electricity through its Niagara power station, which is renewable hydro. But it could do so much more. And because they don't have to pay their investors a profit, they can sell that energy for substantially less, at least 10% less. And that's energy that right now is particularly directed for schools and other municipal and state buildings. But if they have more, if they generate more, we can benefit from expanding that to other recipients. And that bill includes language that John Murphy, who's the head of the Pipefitters Union, said was the best labor language he had seen in any bill. So we're really making headway, I think, in addressing labor's concerns. But we also, another bill that we support is the All Electric Buildings Act. And one of the things that we really want to ensure is that the people who live in the buildings, especially in public housing, are the people who have access to training programs and apprenticeships, that where you live and when there are improvements being made, you should be the community that benefits directly at every level from those improvements. And there's also something that We Act for Environmental Justice has a bill they've written, the Energy Efficiency, Equity, and Jobs Act, which further sort of solidifies this relationship between the climate mitigation efforts we're making and the benefits for people who need good jobs of all kinds in this new green economy.
You know, I think one of the critical baselines is workforce development. And I just think that, you know, this is that watershed and one of many watershed moments to come. We talked about the offshore wind. I know that they're in the capital, in Albany, in the Port of Albany, they're actually training in the company that's got the contract that will actually build the platforms. They are saying to people, listen, you may not have any skill at all in welding. We will train you. And so right now, this is a huge moment in which hopefully a lot of the local workforce development, or this, I'd say, folks, this is a time for you even to be entrepreneurial. Don't wait for somebody to say, you know, you want a job. If you have a vision, I would say go forward. As a person who worked with the first installation of offshore wind in the United States, Block Island Wind, the principal of that company was a Rhode Island State Senate staffer who constantly had the projects and the vision for offshore wind pushed back politically. So he went out, he worked his job, he got language on the books, and he ended up, you know, setting up the first company and got funding, and he bought out a old diesel electric plant that was on Block Island. And from that, with the legislation, he was able, through his gut and his vision, but action, to set up the Block Island Wind Company, which now is the nation's first, and now will be, you know, they will become billionaires. And this was a guy that was on a civil servant salary, you know, $50,000 to $70,000. But I'm saying this is that tremendous watershed opportunity, just not only just to look for a job, but even if you have the entrepreneurial spirit, okay, you know, shaping and crafting legislation, but also setting up the opportunities. This is an opportunity where the skies, you know, is only limited by your vision. You know, we talk about green buses. We could either purchase those buses, or what about communities coming together, creating cooperatives and saying, how do we come up with a build program, you know, to try to get those things manufactured closer to here. I mean, Plattsburgh right now is one of the biggest sources of clean vehicles, clean energy vehicles, but we need more, you know, this is a tremendous opportunity. But something that's near and dear to my heart, which the Assemblywoman Zinnerman worked on, is the Timbuktu Jobs Pipeline, which is connecting Medgar Evers College and SUNY Environmental Science and Forestry College. So what happened, what we recognized is upstate rural colleges happen to be leading in the climate careers, but they're centered in communities that are predominantly, in areas that are predominantly geographically accessible for whites. For urban communities to participate in the green energy, clean energy revolution, and to have the job opportunities at scale and at parity, how are they connected? You know, most of the urban schools are connected with the standard, what I call urban economy. but it's not necessarily gearing forward for that clean energy economy. And so right now, linking up the academic and curriculum programs that are at SUNY ESF or the SUNY system with the CUNY system, which is the City University of New York, we're now bridging a pipeline so that folks from the CUNY campus can go take courses and be part of the SUNY campus up there, getting credentialing, getting certification, but also connecting even the high schools. So even revisiting the BOCE VOTEC program, people do not realize that in this state, one of the biggest investments in the BOCE VOTEC program is what? Fossil fuel car maintenance, right? Automobile mechanics. Where are the clean energy experts? Where are the clean energy? We need a wholesale retooling of the BOCES curriculum so that, youth and urban kids are right now working on the solar panels, geothermal infrastructure, geothermal maintenance, right on down to the state yard. The Timbuktu pipeline, I think, is a visionary North Star. I applaud the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian caucus in underscoring and lifting that up. But it is an advanced deposit. And that, by the way, started last year, the legislation on that, in advance of the bond act. So hopefully rolling that up, scaling that up, and making that opportunity available to all folks in all the CUNYs within the metro area.
Absolutely. I'm super excited about this opportunity. And I'm glad that you mentioned the high school students. I was in Albany on Monday for the chancellors and the regents meeting where they rolled out their 2023 priority. And one of the items, really struck me, and because we've been thinking about, first of all, we're paying back foundation aid, like how do we support those schools that are losing students? And so they've come up with this regional structure. So when we think about the places that don't have BOCES, and I absolutely agree with you that the retooling of their curriculum for 21st century green jobs is necessary. But now having this regional structure in cities, again, that don't have BOCES, they can utilize the same personnel and more kids will have access to specialized programming. And we need to make sure that that programming is, again, for a 21st century green job. So I'm excited about this climate court is going to come out of Medgar Evers, but we're going to make sure that we're building a pipeline from K to 12, making sure that our PTECs are now 16 schools and they're graduating with CTE certification and advanced degrees in engineering and some of the other technical careers that aren't necessarily taught in some urban areas. So thank you all for answering all of my wonderful questions. And now I'm going to open it up for the audience. I may just call on some people. Because I see them. I know that my good friend Irene is here from the Sierra Club and from the Brooklyn Queens Land Trust. So I know she's going to have some great questions for us. And then we have both Cliff, and I've met Glenn for the first time today from MVR Group, and they're doing offshore wind in their company. So I know they perked up in their seats when they heard you talk about offshore wind. So we are going to take the time to invite you all to the mic. If you have a question, you want to make a statement, please come up to the mic, and our panelists are open to your questions.
Good evening,
Good evening.
everybody. My name is Rick Rogers.
Hi, Rick.
I'm a product of the Central Brooklyn Economic Development Corporation.
Oh, how are you? Welcome.
They birthed my business, BizZone USA, entrepreneurial concierge. So we facilitate entrepreneurs with, getting involved in those particular aspects that they're interested in. At the moment, I'm a junior consultant with the MRV Group for the offshore wind industry. That was a partnership between the MRV Group and the Central Brooklyn Economic Development Corporation. So it was my task to learn everything I can learn about the offshore wind industry. Because of the nature of my business and my particular characteristic, that was like a cinch for me, at the risk of sounding immodest. Just knowing what all of the different team members that we're involved with, what their value add is. We have electrical supply persons, we have heating, ventilation, air conditioning persons, we have the gamut. Not to mention Central Brooklyn Economic Development Corporation itself. We're dealing with matter of fact, I just left a class. I'm teaching an entrepreneurship class with Central Brooklyn Economic Development Corporation with students from Medgar Evers College. right now. So I say all that to say that, sir, I'm from the State Environmental Protection Agency,
Environmental conservation.
Environmental Conservation
Yeah.
Agency. Well, you mentioned a number of places where monies will be earmarked. Is there criteria in place where minorities, women, businesses are involved in every aspect of the earmark, of the funding being earmarked?
Well, I'm gonna, as you formulate your answer, I just want to say, and I meant to mention this earlier, that all state contracts, there's a 30% mandate for MWBEs.
For everything that's being earmarked?
Everything that we earmark outside of this bill, there's a 30% MWB mandate. But I'm gonna, that's my answer.
I'll take that as the answer if you're all right with that.
No. Okay, so you can.
Yeah, I mean, those requirements are already in law, I think. And you know, if you're asking, you know, will we go above and beyond that?
Let me be clear. I'm not talking about the typical jobs. I'm not talking about the typical jobbing and the retrofitting of the buildings. I'm talking about those jobs that will require training. For that myself and others like myself who haven't been readily exposed to that systematically.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a part of the conversation when we're looking at different programs and what gets presented in different projects that get presented. There's going to be a host of different criteria that are going to be involved. Meeting those requirements is definitely going to be one of them, and meeting other requirements and maybe like the ones that you're talking about might be a part of the calculus as well. But we're still in the process of developing some of the programs, most of the programs that this money is going to be funneled into, and also where there are existing programs, this money isn't, I don't believe, just going to be like dumped into them. You know, there's going to be additional work that's going to happen to make sure that this money is going to the right places and for the right things inside of those existing programs. So it's good to have that feedback. And all I can say right now is that we're at the beginning stages of those processes.
Okay, great. And I just want to be
If I may
clear.
add, if I may add.
I'm sorry.
One of the good things about a panel like this is that you bring in experts from all the states. And I mean, that is one role because the state has its various processes. But since I was part of the Port of Albany conversation where they're going to actually do manufacturing,
Yeah.
and they had mentioned, so I think that, you know, perhaps through the legislature or yourself, the Port of Albany, you can drop my name. Said Aaron Mayer heard that the manufacturer will be looking to train and do workforce development for people who may not have experience in welding, form fitting, et cetera, for offshore wind projects. Is that true? And what's the programs and how are people being screened for that? And what I'm getting at is the specifics of the money and set-asides, but that industry is going to be getting millions of dollars to build that infrastructure that will go off of Long Island. And so it's on ramping. So how they're working with the local municipality in the capital region, that conversation probably isn't happening downstate. And so therefore the opportunity on workforce development and training, just as you said, if you're coming in off the street, I never did it, but I'm very interested and I'm willing to get the sweat equity and the intellectual equity in so I can learn that skill. I do know that the Port of Albany is a good resource to find out the means and mechanisms by which they're doing the workforce development around that. Because right now they know that they do not have the workforce ready to do the manufacturing for the offshore wind platforms and the offshore wind infrastructure that they're going to be scaling up to do and meet that demand. So right now I do know you know, there is a series of conversations they're having within the city of Albany in the capital region, but that can absolutely be of a benefit, especially even down here as folks are starting to deal with offshore wind, because this is where it's coming to. The manufacture is going to occur up in the capital region, a significant piece of it, but the output is going to be down here. And so you can actually be involved and engaged at any point in the supply chain. But the issue is, how do I get knowledge about what's going on? And this is to the benefit of Assemblywoman Zinnerman, is that you have opportunities like this and she brings in folks who are experts. And so me dropping that, like I said, I can reach back to Assemblywoman Zinnerman to actually give her names of individuals that are working on that. And that can be something that her office can have available, at least be a point of contact on how that workforce development work is being done.
Very good. I'll let some of my colleagues speak to that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I
Jean wants
I
to
wanted to
answer.
add one more thing, which is that in addition to information being made available to you and others about accessing these opportunities, I think it's really important that you, Mr. Rogers, and the larger community influence how these programs are developed, that it shouldn't be just the folks in the State Department coming up. It's sort of like the street trees. You got to know what kinds of trees are appropriate to plant in the community. And we've got to know how to create programs that are, in fact, welcoming and responsive to the specific needs of your community. So you should be the consultant to these kinds of projects.
Well, you'll be surprised. When my team members speak, you'll see that we're deeply entrenched in that, and particularly that Albany aspect, which you mentioned. And I just want to end by saying that I'm not asking just simply before Black or Hispanic persons like that. I'm talking about for people to take control of their destiny, to get in those positions so that they can start making environmental decisions at some point.
No, I feel
Very
it's a
good.
very excellent point, but I also want to be very clear. As we've had significant economic transformations in our economy,
Yes, sir.
The Black and Hispanic communities have historically been locked out and left behind. So I'm not going to put that as secondary or side or have to appease. Let's be clear. We are now in a period where we recognize that race matters in decision-making, economic development, economic investment, in this case, climate investment and climate resilience. So it does matter. The issue that Assemblywoman Zinnerman is focusing on is equity and access. That language is specifically built in as set-aside language, and not only in the State Bond Act, but even in the Federal Justice 40. So there is a national conversation. So don't ever put yourself in a parking lot or on a side road. They've already done that. Speak strong and forceful,
Not doing that.
and demand, your seat at the table.
No doubt about it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank all of you.
Thank you.
Can I add a little bit?
Yes.
So just to put a finer point on what I was talking about before and connecting some of the things. So I talked about leveraging before. So I think that will likely be a large part of project selection. And under the CLCPA that we talked about before, there's a requirement for communities to be benefited, disadvantaged communities to be benefited. So I think that there's a lot of synergy that's going to be happening in between these things, and workforce development might be a key component there.
Very good. And when we're talking about leveraging, again, we're not talking about those token positions.
No.
Right. Talking about leveraging funding and making sure that the communities are benefited.
The
Yeah.
technical aspects of it,
Yeah.
water and sewer going down there, teaching people from my neighborhood how to do that.
Yep.
Yes. I'm a proud member of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Caucus, as well as the association, and now the newly formed Black Legislative Task Force. And so there's nearly 70 of us out of the 150 members. The majority holding, I think we're now at 103 after the recent election. But my colleagues and I focus, our framework is equity. Everything that we look at, if you look at MRTA, the other big bill that passed, if you look at where we are in talking about this $4.2 billion bill, it is embedded. We all know what the racial wealth gap looks like. And so we wanted to make sure that communities of color were on, and specifically Black communities were on, had the opportunity to be onboarded first, and in their communities were being targeted now in a positive manner, where we're saying that we're reaching out to you. And so when you think about the different access points, there will be people who will come to us who have expertise in a job, that we can place them in any of these bucket areas. There will be people who will be looking for training, and will provide workforce development opportunities for them. But there'll be entrepreneurs like the one that's standing at the mic right now, who's saying that I have the ability at this particular time to actually accept an RFP, a request for proposal that the state is putting out. And I'm going to apply for it, and I'm going to have an opportunity to compete on a level. And then, of course, those people who have smaller companies, but do have expertise, they can subcontract with a larger company. So there are many opportunities for people to access these funds. And as the state kind of rolls out what that's going to look like, again, you can contact my office to make sure that you have that information. But you don't have to worry about it because I'm going to be reaching into community, trying to bring everybody to the table. Okay. Yes. All right. I'm glad to hear that. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Cliff Exel. I'm the owner of JetX Mechanical. We're a full HVAC mechanical contractor, construction services and industrial supplies. I just have, and I'm a service disabled vet. And you know what I did for the country. I have a couple, 4 questions, maybe 8. Depends what it is. It's a whole bunch of run-ons. The first thing is with the contracts, right? Like a contractor like myself or somebody in a diverse community, right? We hear all these opportunities coming, but they're not real. They're not real. They're really not realistic because this is what happens, right? You say, or whoever it is, say, here's a contract, small person, whatever. Here's $1 million contract. It needs to be bonded, right? Now the small contractor doesn't have insurance. They don't have bonding capability. What are we doing about that? This is where it's going to continuously go because you're going in these communities and you're giving them these contracts that you know they can't really handle. Like they can't handle because they're not built enough. They don't have the financial capacity to even do it. Like the insurance requirements are like huge. Is there a certain set asides like to put for the bonding capability, the insurance, like to really give a proper opportunity for small communities? Because all what's going to happen is the big boys are going to come into town and they're going to say, yeah, I tried to reach out to so-and-so and I couldn't find nobody. So I went with this person. The usual suspects. This has been happening forever and it's still happening now.
I think
Because there's no enforcement.
this, okay, well, I'll start with this, the answer. I think when you go through this particular piece of legislation, you'll see just how intentional we were in crafting language because of situations like this, right? It is the reason why we want to make sure that people who don't have that capacity can still have a seat at the table to working with a larger contractor who has all of the insurance and has what they need in order to win a state contract. It is the reason why we said, we know that there are smaller companies who can't compete with others, but there's going to be a set aside for them because they represent the communities that we're trying to cure. But this is where, going back to Jean's remarks, where we need your voice and your advocacy. I can see all of that passion. This needs to be articulated. This is something that you need to demand of the state so that we figure out how to support what you do. You know, I always tell people the first thing that you always need to think about is, can you do business with the state? Like, is all your paperwork in place so that you can actually do business with the state and you can accept a state contract? And then be very clear about the RFP language and where you may not have something that is required. That is where you can get in contact with other local smaller agencies, or maybe even a larger one, so they can subcontract. You can subcontract with them, or another smaller agency who may have something that you don't have. The two of you could partner on a particular RFP. So there's all sorts of methods and strategies that we can use, but we want to hear more of this so that we can address them, because the whole point of this for us is to make sure that those communities who haven't had the opportunities and have been harmed can be made whole in these situations.
Okay, I have a second part,
You
like
mind?
along with, go ahead.
It's out of my wheelhouse, but I do understand.
Nothing's out of his wheelhouse.
But I do understand a little bit. First of all, thank you for your service. I saw the Corps of Engineer badge, and I said, okay, but I'm Navy vet. You know, they
I'm
actually-
sorry.
Oh, we got to do Army Navy now.
You know, we had a rough weekend, but my daughter's also they're West Point graduates, and so we have this thing in the family too. But that said, there's, you know, this is why I say look at this as that starting conversation. So you're being alerted to. So here's the intel. There's this $4.1 billion. But that's the top intel piece. Now, the deeper research is, you're asking the right question, is how is this being operationalized so that, if something falls in our bucket. So that is where I think perhaps, in fact, if they don't have it, I would say work with, the borough president and other folks and listen, we understand $4.1 billion is coming down. And this is what local chambers of commerce and, the white chambers of commerce do. They hear a big federal outlay or a big state outlay. They immediately go out and do the bird dogging on how it can fall in the pocket of their members, right? So if you don't have a black chamber of commerce or 100 black men or folks or an entity that's doing your chamber of commerce type work to help you operationalize it, then get together, your brothers, pull it together and say, well, okay, then here's what a chamber of commerce would do. So we're going to meet with the borough president and all these other folks. Because the way it gets operationalized, you got Department of Labor, New York State Department of Labor, you got New York State Department of Economic Development, all these other pieces that DEC doesn't control, but they are the mechanisms that things touch upon. The money comes down, but as somebody wanted to mention, you got the MWBE certification, all these other buckets, let's check. If not, do you have partnerships that you can operationalize who do have MWBE certification that can work, that you can network with? So what I'm saying is, get the top line intelligence of $4.1 billion, and there's going to be these set asides. But I think the further follow up and follow on is what are the state economic development and other entities that may be operationalizing and that you may be able to work through to get some or support. Do they have workshops on the grant writing or et cetera? Because some of them actually do have grant writing workshops and application workshops. And if they don't, who do you want to get one set up for the Brooklyn borough, or we got 3 boroughs that want to come together, minority business contractors in 4 boroughs. We want a workshop on blah, blah, blah. But now's the time, A, to raise that question, but B, to walk back and say, okay, we know it's coming. The bond act just got voted on. We got this spring to operationalize and trying to make sure that we are in line for the opportunity. So what I'm saying is that when they pass these legislation and these monies, the legislature doesn't sit and mark up all the little details, what you got to go through, but it is with that understanding that I have of knowing what a private sector businessman, if he's trying to get that money, what they got to go through, what partnerships, what networks they got to go through. And this is why I talk about, for example, the city of Albany with this workforce development. That's happening up in Albany. They're actually doing those workshops, working with minority business folks there. But I know that bubble is where it's happening at. And so is it happening elsewhere? Because again, that infrastructure that they're going to build in Albany is going to be installed right off of Long Island down here. So how do you build that network, and how do you reach out the borough president or even with the legislature? How do we pull together these other state agencies that may be critical to helping you on ramp and connect your expertise with that opportunity? So this is a great, forum, and this is why forums like this, folks who show up, they get the knowledge. Folks who don't show up, as they snooze, they lose. So I offer that to you as some ideas and approaches, but I would say definitely you want to the gun is already fired since this thing's got passed. Now you want to definitely have an operational plan on how do we build up, and contact the other agencies to find out how do we position ourselves for this opportunity.
Okay. Well, there's a trick going around, right? What's happening is now the big companies with the minority this certification, what's happening is they're creating their own companies that are minority companies, and there's no limit. A limit should be passed on for you to be a minority, like to participate in these contracts. You can't be $100 million, $50 million and still considered a minority, because you're competing with small companies that's trying to get their first million, 2 million, and they're still considered. They have resources galore, and there's really no consequence. There isn't even a consequence if they don't use a minority. Why is there a percentage for a minority? What happens to the other 70? Why is there 30%? So why can't we part?
No, it's 30% of all contracts. So of all the contracts that we give, 30% is set aside.
I think what he's getting at is how once these things that are set up to so-called correct the gaps, there are always workarounds. Welcome to capitalism, number one. So the capitalists will always come up with crooks. That's why the initial was MBE, Minority Business Enterprise, right? And so it's interesting the U.S. Chamber of Commerce will want to work it. Okay, we got to do it. We got to take. We don't. Hey, we don't want to do this. Okay, well, can we have women today? All of a sudden they go, wow, Chamber of Commerce wants women. So what happened? A lot of construction companies, what did they do? They refiled their companies in their wives' names, right?
Or their mothers.
So, or their mothers, or their sisters, or their daughters, right? So we already know this is the oldest stuff. My point is, don't hate the player, hate the game, but understand what the game is, and you're not going to cure that. But when you see that gap and that trick, it's definitely you want to say, and that's why I say, you have chambers of commerce is why because chambers of commerce is nothing more than people who experience the same problems, the same issues. They come together and they form an association that attacks that issue. So this is why, if you don't have one here, you should be here and lifting that issue up, saying, listen, we want to make sure that it isn't a multinational or transnational company engaging in tokenistic practices or black cover or black facing, when they are actually still this other entities. At the end of the day is making sure that you're lifting up and identifying your voice. It's like environmental justice movement. We didn't let up, and wait for, because you shouldn't poison us, or whatever have you. The answer is, why'd you do it? Well, it was cheaper over there. We made money off of that.
But it is also the reason, when we think about the bill, when it first was implemented, and the city is not even at 30%, right? It's the reason why a lot of us ran for office, because we understood these issues. Some people have experienced them, some heard from their neighbors and friends and constituents, and this is something that we take seriously and we work with all the time. You know what happens though? We usually don't hear about them in real time. People don't report what's happening, and they tell us when they're very, very frustrated. And so what we're saying, as you're going through this process, because I know you're going to go through this process, that any irregularities, you need to report in real time, because we have agencies that we have the ability to say you can't get this contract because you don't meet, right? You're basically committing fraud, but we need to hear that information in real time. So I know you got two more questions.
Yeah,
and
when
then we're gonna
economic
move on.
opportunity, snitching is okay. You know what I'm saying? This is when somebody is snatching money out your pocket, it ain't cool just to say, oh man, he got the money. No. Say something.
We're not doing that. Did you want to say something, Eunice, before we go to that? Okay, all right.
All right, I guess I'll spare you. I'll just
No.
make it one.
Listen, we have exactly
We got
16.
time.
We have
All right, I
26
got
more
20 more
minutes.
questions.
No, not 20 questions. We have 26 more minutes.
I have let me tell you a little bit more about my background. I'm a union trained welder. This is what I did. I went through Local 638 after I got out of the military, did the apprenticeship. So along with my HVAC company, I'm giving back. So I'm involved with 2 nonprofit agencies to start training welders. Like, I know for sure, like, it helped me because I went from working for JP Morgan Chase, working, making 50 grand, like, for 8 years. Like, why? Like, I'm not saying that's not a lot of money, but that's for a long time, you're stuck at that, but there should be a different options. If you don't want to go into the corporate world, that you can make at least a decent amount of money. So this is why, like, I know it gave back. Like, I worked in nuclear facilities, industrial places, like places that I never thought that I would work, but it's just because I was a welder. I want to give that back. I have 2 nonprofit agencies that I'm working with that, that's really putting in the work. And how do we get facilities? Like, we want a facility right here in Brooklyn to teach. I know I hear the fancy schools and all, but where are they? They're far. How are we getting there? We need one right here in Brooklyn.
So
right here.
You're an entrepreneur, brother. Make it happen.
yes.
I'm trying. I need money.
Well,
Need money.
what you need are resources. So sometimes it's not just about the dollar. And again, that is the reason why I was very encouraged sitting with the regents this week and hearing about their regional school plan. We have a lot of schools that are almost empty now. People have left the state. people are homeschooling, they're sending their kids to different schools. And so it's an opportunity for us to look at communities that we serve, and see which type of facilities, like I'm sure you have the specs for what it is that you need. You need to have a conversation with superintendents and with principals and find out what they have available in their building. And know that even if they only have 200 kids in their particular school, and there's space available for you to run your program, that you'll probably end up with 1,000 kids when people hear about it, because this regional plan will allow for other schools to partner with the site that you're at. And the mayor has made a commitment, the chancellor has made a commitment, when we have not-for-profit agencies, that they should have the opportunity to use the space in schools free, as long as they are providing a service to the students. And in this case, CTE certification, and training in a 21st century green job is a perfect scenario. So I would certainly, encourage you to reach out to superintendents at schools and principals themselves and talk to them about your not-for-profit.
I had an opportunity. I did speak to a bunch of schools, even the Boys and Girls High School over the summer.
Which has a welding unit.
Exactly. I was offered the area, but the city is using it as a hub for PPE.
I think that's something that can be worked out. Question number 4.
Again, I'll spare you. I'll pass it on to my colleague.
Anybody has a question?
Thank you, by the way.
You're welcome. By the way.
Well, my name is David Taylor.
Hello.
This is my first time coming to an event like this.
Oh, well, welcome.
I was
Thank you
spurred
for
on by
coming.
These guys here. They come up here and see what it's like.
Mhm.
And I wasn't going to come up in the beginning, but I heard it, was talking about the situation with minorities and bidding with the city. And one of the big blocks is, like Cliff said, is bonding. Any job, I know the mayor talked about it in the beginning, that he was going to do something about the bonding issue. And they did, because the bonding could lock out a contractor that could be doing his job $50,000, $100,000. And if you don't have the bonding, not the insurance, the bonding is a big issue. If you don't have that, you can't do a little $50,000 job. And that'll prevent a small contractor from going from 1 step to 5 steps.
So this is what I'm going to do, because this is a recurring theme. I think that we could arrange for folks who are expert in this area come and have a conversation, forum
Maybe that
like
should be a
this.
forum.
Yes, where people can talk about their experiences and they could walk you through the process. You could talk about what some of the pitfalls you've experienced, and let's workshop how we can address this issue.
And also, taking off of what Cliff said about the training. You mentioned about the green jobs and the money that they're all been. You need to start places like in Bed-Stuy. I'm from Bed-Stuy. There's nothing like no green, no trade school, nothing in Bed-Stuy.
Well, this is what I'll say about that. I work in Albany half the year. It's not that far away. I work there during the daytime. During the week. I come home on the weekend when we're in legislative session. So when I think about where we're going as a community, a number of people are moving upstate. A lot of people move upstate because it's more affordable and they can have a job as well. I think another option is, as we're looking at what could happen in Coney Island, and some of the other places, there are probably going to be some of these big projects downstate as well. Queens, JFK has an entire program. No, I'm sorry, it's LaGuardia. I just saw the model today where there's an offshore wind project set to happen there as well. So there will be opportunities downstate as well. And what I would say, and I say this all the time, please sign up for New York State, for DC, any agency that you want information from, sign up. They send information on a regular basis. Get registered with the state. Once you are a recognized state contractor, they always send you the RFPs first, request for proposals, because they're looking for expertise. And so they want people to have the ability to sign up quickly.
The one thing is, if they put a contract out for 30 million,
We understood that question. That was your first question. I understand that, right? We can't cure everything here tonight.
no,
But
I'm
what
just
we
putting,
can
I'm just putting it
say,
out there. I'm just putting it
but
out there.
what we can say is that we can get you that information, so you can ask the question and we can figure out for a smaller company. And I think Brother Aaron answered the question, looking at your Chamber of Commerce's. We have a very active one here in Brooklyn, the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Society of Black Engineers. There are all sorts of organizations, and then other smaller contractors. You could have the opportunity to compete on a higher level if you have partnership agreements. And so I think we should definitely follow up on your concerns and figure out how you can get connected. This panel can't do that. Our job here today was simply to explain to people what the Bond Act is. It is a huge opportunity for the state, but it's also a huge bill with a lot of moving parts, not bill now, law, but a lot of moving parts. And we really wanted to make sure that people knew what they actually voted for. Some people voted for it because Democrats said, or because Jean or Eunice called them up on the phone and said, you got to vote for this, right? We wanted to make sure today that people understood what it meant. It is going to take a little while for the state agencies to ramp up and then get you the information about what it's going to look like in community. But at least now we're at the point where we know the right questions to ask, and we've got experts here that you have their contact information. You certainly can give them a call as well as it goes on. And I'm promising that we're going to continue this dialogue and continue to bring other experts to the table to address concerns, because we want you to be in business with the state. Matter of fact, we need you all to be in business with the
At the
state.
same time, before these jobs come out, you have to get people ready, trained.
Absolutely. That's why the connection with the state agency, following up on what's happening in Albany, all of those things are important. Because again, the jobs may start in Albany right now because they're ready to go, but this is going to continue to grow. And this is not the first investment that we're going to make, because we absolutely need to have this if we want to save our planet. Thank you.
Assemblywoman, if I just add one thing, so I know we've talked about the Port of Albany a lot, and sorry, I was trying to remember specifically, and I just looked it up, but EDC did announce, I think it was a few days ago on Staten Island, they're trying to transform, Rossville. It's like a municipal site that they are turning into an offshore wind port facility for manufacturing and assembling of wind turbine components. So it looks like already the College of Staten Island has received some funding to train students to help support this. And so anyway, I'm just naming that as like another opportunity, maybe not so far upstate, where potentially there could be some job opportunities or some type of opportunity to connect with this assembly site and the manufacturing site.
Thank
And
you.
what will be there. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that. That was good. So we're gonna wrap up by asking any other questions, because we got 5 minutes. Would you like to ask a question? And then we're just gonna ask for closing remarks of the panel, maybe 45 seconds each in our closing remarks. All righty.
Thank you very much for putting this together. It's so important. And information is fantastic, and thank you to Mr. McNair. Aaron Mayer, right?
Yes.
You mentioned the lead is still in the pipes in the public schools. So I wonder for DEC, how you prioritize these kind of projects, because it's all very exciting to do solar panels and all that, but we need clean water in the schools. How does that work?
Sure. So responsibility for drinking water is generally a municipality's responsibility. And then the state Department of Health really regulates drinking water. That being said, if there are environmental contaminants that are getting into drinking water, that is definitely inside of our wheelhouse. So I think that there are going to be, potential opportunities for funding of lots of different types of projects under the Bond Act. And like I said previously, there is a large group of different agencies who are working together to figure out how to most efficiently direct these funds where they need to go. So my final remarks would be that we're super excited to continue this process that we're engaged in right now, which is community engagement and making sure that we're hearing from people about what's important to them, and also on the nuts and bolts of it, like how to go through the process of delivering these funds. So I would say if this is an issue that you're super concerned about, then it is extremely important that keep engaging, and there will be more opportunities to engage not only with DEC on this, but also folks from different expert areas like New York State Department of Health.
So does it mean that the city has to make it a priority, or?
So there's going to be intermediary organizations who are going to manage the funds ultimately. Lots of times that's going to be a municipality. So New York City could be the entity that's going to have the funds, but it also could be a nonprofit, let's say, that has a project and a program for addressing an issue like that. So, but in terms of like drinking water in schools, then you would have to probably have the, Department of Education there, for
Because
example.
some of the schools have the water turned off.
Yes, and they use bottled water, or at least we're not making them pay for it anymore. But just to underscore what he said, and just to say what the priorities of the caucus is. We absolutely have prioritized this as an issue. Each of us will be making a list of all of the high impacted schools in our district by zip code, and we're going to compile that list together, and we will be having a conversation with the commissioner about ensuring that these are the high priority areas. And we would love your support and others on the panel support, really with supporting that particular strategy to make sure that, of course, the people who are most harmed, and in this case, our kids are being taken care of first.
All right, thank you.
All righty. So wrap up remarks quickly. So I think you've already done so. So we're going to go Eunice and Jean, Aaron, and then we'll close out. And I'll be here to answer any questions as we pack up.
Thank you all for your insightful questions and just being here and taking the opportunity to learn more about the Bond Act and all the potential opportunity we can unlock, particularly for environmental justice communities. They really see this as the beginning of a long road. This type of funding and legislation is key to, again, meeting the ambitious goals that were set by the CPA. And so we're all going to need, collectively, we're going to need from welders to teachers to engineers to agency officials, really all working together to figure out how we get out of this climate crisis and ensure that people who have, again, been made vulnerable by capitalism, white supremacy, really have the chances that have been historically denied to them to, again, thrive in a livable future.
Thank you, Eunice.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Assemblymember, for organizing this. It's been incredibly interesting. I think what I'm really coming away with from here is that we are at a moment when the climate, the response to the climate crisis is really being revolutionized, or it's simply going to solidify business as usual. And it is up to us to make sure that real change follows from this injection of money, both this $4.2 billion, but also the money from the IRA and any other funds that are coming down from the legislature. And the other thing that really struck me about this was we've got, on the one hand, a need for literally thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people who are trained both on the construction and manufacturing side and also on the planning and administrative and design side, we need people to fill jobs, and there are people who need jobs and training. And we need to be sure that we align this in a really smart way so that the communities who are most affected by climate change are the communities that are most benefiting from our response to climate change.
Thank you.
And on that point, again, this Bond Act, and what's great about this process is you got a sense in the window on how this bucket of revenue were created and the problems that it's being created to resolve and tackle and change. But it needs to be implemented. Agencies and regulations, all these things have to happen. And you're coming here with another critical piece. How do we operationalize it? And one of the big takeaways from this is some of the intel on how other communities are doing it. These things, by the nature of the beast of how monies are put together, and as I said, the reservoir of opportunity and revenue are there. Now comes the details. And it's not, in some cases, it's not a conspiracy. It's the issue is how do we get and connect these dots? How do we connect in the opportunity where there's the most need, even at the point of not only relying on the technology, but also the work. And, how do we take advantage of the entrepreneurial side? So this is where we have that complex state, but again, offering you up that here's the power of these trade associations, these chambers of commerce, here's what they do. And if one doesn't exist, you create that congregation, you create that church so that the message that you need to preach of what your experiences are being put on the table. Whether it's Staten Island or Albany, those entities are seeking the big federal grant and the big opportunity to grant to build this technology. And it's when they hold those hearings, that's when the community can come to the table, good old grassroots advocate, whether it's fighting against something or fighting for something. So that's those legal notices are sitting out there, and you got to pay attention to those. That's how they, by law, put out what's going to be happening in any place in space and any opportunity. And they're hoping to God that you don't read those legal notices. That's why they're tiny and buried in the paper. But when you do snag them, but showing up and at those hearings, and it's that community saying, listen, no, before you sign off elected leader for this area or whatever, we want these set-asides. We want this training. And that's one of those vehicles and opportunities in on-ramp. Nobody's going to give it and deliver it. You got to basically go up and pull it out. But the great thing is that you have a wonderful legislator here in Assemblywoman Zinnerman, and that she's making these connections and building these bridges so that not only can you hear and see and know of the opportunities, but also hopefully find a way, take that intelligence from here and start to build that way. But also make sure you're going to her and her staff to say, are there models or things that we can replicate, or you have a context? One of the great things of her staff and her leadership is pulling folks from the Adirondack Mountains to come down here and share. Come down from that mountain and bring that right down here, to Brooklyn. And that's the power of a good legislator, is bringing that knowledge to the community so that you can operationalize it and suit it to fit you. And thank you for this opportunity.
Well, thank you. Can we just give it up for all of our panel? Sane Energy Project, Adirondack Council, New York Environmental Justice Alliance, and of course, the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. Thank you for all being here this evening. And again, I'm gonna end how I started, just thanking you all for first trusting us enough, understanding how important this is, and voting to make sure that we could meet our goals of saving our planet and making sure that the next generation can live on a healthy planet. Please, please, please share this information with people that you have, people who want to be in the business of helping us save New York State and keeping it green or making it greener. My office is available to help you, and this is just the beginning. Today was just an opportunity for us to talk about and dissect the act itself. But now we've got some work to do, right? We have to work with the state agencies, and we have over 100, but there'll be a handful of those that will be directly involved with this project, right? We want to make sure whether or not you're a homeowner, you're somebody seeking a job, you are a parent of a school child, or you live in a climate vulnerable community. We want to make sure that you have the knowledge that you need so that you can advocate for yourself and your community. Now you are introduced to another group of people who have the same values as you do, and the same thirst to make sure that we get this done right. We're going to need additional resources, and the citizens of the state of New York are our prime gems and and resources. So we want to make sure that we're working together so that we're all whole. So I am Assemblymember Stephanie Zinnerman. I can be reached at 718-399-7630. My email address is zinnermans@nyassembly.gov, and my office is located in Restoration Plaza, 1368 Fulton Street, Brooklyn, New York, 11216. So we want to make sure that we are, from this time moving forward, and working in partnership with each other, using the state resources to educate yourself about what is coming down the pipe, signing up for all the information from the different agencies. And if you want to do business with the state, please start to pull down those applications and complete them. And if you need guidance or assistance with that, you can reach out to our office for that as well. And then, of course, you've gotten some wonderful guidance from our panelists. So we're all in this together. Hashtag we keep us safe. And so we're going to continue to do that together. So thank you all for joining us online and in person. And again, give it up for this wonderful panel. 7 minutes over. But
Good job.
we did it. Absolutely. Thank you, Jean, for pitching in.
Thank you so much.
At the last moment, we are going to take a group photo. So if we could get set up for that quickly. And